Hello and welcome. Coming up tonight, why do so many Labour MPs want Burnham, not Starmer? I'll ask the Scottish Secretary, Douglas Alexander. Is immigration falling to zero? I'll find out from the Migration Advisory Committee Chair, Brian Bell. Lucky Pippa is in Beijing and she'll tell me if Starmer is more comfortable with a dictator than with Manchester's mayor, while Paul Brandon Screeney will assess Starmer's decision to block Andy Burnham.
Yeah, we're going to see whether one big personality could have flipped the polls and whether the Prime Minister will be the real loser in this by-election.
And throughout the show, Labour's Dr Rosena Allin-Khan will explain why Labour is so poorly, and Reform's Jake Berry will explain why Nigel Farage is putting Liz Truss's band back together. It's quite something to be the leader who won the second most decisive election victory in Labour Party history only 18 months ago, and yet to be disliked both by most voters and surrounded by rivals all convinced they do a better job. Yet Keir Starmer has that unique distinction, and what's even more remarkable, perhaps, it doesn't seem to bother him, and to use his own phrase, he ploughs on regardless, seemingly without a care in the world. If Andy Burnham, Mayor of Greater Manchester, thought his own relative popularity would persuade or intimidate Starmer into getting out of his way and allow him to return to Parliament as candidate in the Gorton and Denton by-election, he's got other thoughts now. Starmer calculated that life in a Donald Trump world is complicated enough without Burnham returning to the House of Commons as an ever-present symbol for anxious Labour MPs that other possible Prime Ministers are available. But if I were one of the pretenders to the throne, streeting Raina Mahmood at all, I might be worried by the company that Keir Starmer keeps. Against all expectations, he's successfully cultivated an American president, Donald Trump, who views the US legal system as a tool to punish anyone who has had the temerity to challenge him. And Starmer is now in China making an accommodation with a President Xi who purges powerful colleagues with the routine casualness of putting on a new white shirt. The point about Starmer is he may be rubbish at devising a coherent strategy to revive Britain that anybody understands, or at selling himself to voters, but he seems untroubled by self-doubt, and he'll never volunteer to leave the big stage. If Streeting or Rayner or Burnham were eventually to have the temerity to have a run at him, he'll stick a leg out and they'll feel it all right. What do you think, Paul?
Well, look, Robert, firstly tonight I want to take the view from the loo, because this was the Prime Minister's plane on the way to Beijing. He's saying bye-bye by-election, hello Beijing this week. Our own Pippa Crerar here, crammed inside the plane toilet while they huddle with the Prime Minister to ask him questions. We can talk to Pippa later about what they were laughing about here. It is presumably a relief, though, as you say, for the Prime Minister to be flying off to a country where challenging authority is rarely countenanced. But back home, did he make the right decision in blocking Andy Burnham from standing for Parliament? Well, one determining factor, of course, will be that Gorton and Denton by-election. This was the result there in the general election, a massive lead for Labour, the kind of seat where they just weigh the vote, as they say. Reform and the Greens second and third, but not really posing any threat here. Well, what a difference 18 months makes. This is some forecasting by Ben Walker from Britain Predicts. It's in line with other polls out there at the moment, predicting a Reform win this time around on 34%, only a couple of points ahead of Labour, actually. So this is quite close, but look at the damage that the Greens are doing to Labour's prospects, peeling off 20% of the left-wing vote here. And this already builds in anyone who's actually voting tactically. The Tories and the Lib Dems, by the way, didn't really turn out to be major players in the general election. We don't know what impact the Workers' Party might have this time around, but this result flips if you ask voters to imagine Andy Burnham as the Labour candidate. So you can see Labour win under that scenario. The change in percentage is not huge, but regardless, it's enough to put Labour back in first place. Peeling off a few points from Reform, it looks like. The Green vote, though, quite stubborn. Green voters can be especially resistant to switching parties. So the Burnham effect could have been pretty decisive to this result. And now blocking Burnham could be pretty decisive to Keir Starmer's premiership. Losing this seat, as we know, Robert, will put the blame at the Prime Minister's door.
Yep, that's absolutely right, Paul. So I'm going to ask you, Rosena, I mean, Keir Starmer made a mistake in blocking Andy Burnham, didn't he?
I I think he did make a mistake in blocking Andy. I think that local people, local members should choose who stands, and I think he should have been allowed to at least throw his hat in the ring. It's not inevitable that the local members would have chosen him, but I think he should have been given the opportunity. I do understand that having a by-election would be costly, but I do think that there would have been some ways to mitigate that. They could have even asked Andy to help fundraise for it, or they could have actually held it at the same time as the May elections, which are coming up in Manchester, and held off till then, and that would have saved some money. And I do think that the PLP would have benefited from having someone potentially who has had Andy's experience in government. And I think that our party is best when we are a broad church, and I think the Cabinet could reflect that more widely. I don't necessarily think that this was all about Keir being concerned that Andy was going to try and take his job. I think that it was a mistake, and it should have played out the way that by-elections do. I mean, I came in a by-election, and I think it would be sad if it is true that a Labour loss would be as a result of not having Burnham, though I think it would be impossible to ever know for sure.
But if you do lose Gorton and Denton, how damaged will the Prime Minister be?
I think it's always difficult, and Jake will know this. Any party in government, by-elections don't tend to favour them well. I do think it would be an unfortunate loss for Labour, particularly given the large majority that we had initially. But we do have a set of very serious elections coming up in May, and I think that will be very telling, really, of how the country views Keir's leadership and the Labour Party 2 years into office.
Jake, I made a little bit of a joke at the beginning about Nigel Farage putting Liz Truss's band back together again. You actually got in quite early in terms of defections. There are people who say that Nigel Farage is now making a mistake welcoming so many Tories, given that, you know, the electorate did reject your former party pretty comprehensively, and they probably don't want it back again. So, I mean, do you think that seeing so many people like Suella join the party is good for reform?
What I'd say, I mean, you're right. The British public did reject the Conservative Party wholeheartedly just 18 months ago. Quite a lot of the people you're talking about weren't involved in Rishi Sunak's government, and it certainly was a different government, not one I found myself particularly in support of. But if you look at Conservatives who've come over to reform, they've all been pretty consistent. When I was thinking back today of the colleagues who voted against the Rwanda bill, the government bill, voted against our own government because it wasn't tough enough. I was in the division lobby with Rob Jenrick, Suella Braverman, Danny Kruger and others. David Jones was in there as well. Also, when I was in Parliament, I launched this thing called the UK Tax Pledge, a pledge to get MPs to sign up to say that they wouldn't put taxes up, which were, even then, eye-wateringly high. And a lot of the people who've come over to reform signed that pledge. Again, it's sort of a consistent group of colleagues. But I look at my old party, the Conservative Party, and particularly the speech Kemi Badenoch made today, and this new movement led by the sort of the ultra-wets, which has become the new Conservative Party. And I can't tell the difference between what they stand for, what the Labour Party stand for, what the Lib Dems stand for. It's just a sort of uniparty. And how I feel about British politics, there's now two parties. There's effectively the old established parties and reform. And you can see that at Prime Minister's Question Time. I mean, Nigel Farage must be the most mentioned person in the history of Prime Minister's Question. Doesn't matter who's asking the question. All they want to talk about is Nigel Farage because it's the insurgent force versus the uniparty.
And I'm going to come back to you, both of you, about lots of other things, but just very quickly, yes or no on Liz Truss. If she were to want to join, would you have her in the party?
Well, ultimately, it wouldn't be my decision, but it would be definitely a no from me. And it's a no from Nigel, because he's already said it.
That'd be a bad idea. OK,
that's interesting unanimity between the two of you. Rosena giving advice to reform, that's a first. But anyway, now, we're going to come back to both of you in a minute or two. A little earlier, I spoke to the Secretary of State for Scotland, Douglas Alexander, and I began by asking him what he would say to Labour MPs who've been telling me, actually pretty much what Rosena just told me, that the Prime Minister's decision to block Andy Burnham as a candidate in the Gorton and Denton by-election shows how insecure the Prime Minister is.
I'd say it's more about the circumstances than the man. The circumstances are in just 99 days. We've got critical elections in Scotland, where I'm directly involved, in Wales and across large parts of England. And frankly, if we were in a position where, as a result of Andy standing in the by-election and we would have hoped elected as the new Member of Parliament, we would then have faced more than 20 by-elections effectively for the mayoralty in Manchester.
But in the last mayoral election, Andy Burnham won 10 of all of the Greater Manchester boroughs, and he got 63% of the vote. You'd have walked it. I mean, you're basically saying that Mancunians, may love Andy, but they hate anybody else associated with Keir Starmer. That's a really bad look for you.
I think they certainly do love Andy. I'm partial. I served with him in Gordon Brown's cabinet. I think he is like a genuine political talent and is doing a fabulous job and has another couple of years to run as the mayor in Manchester. But I'm also not
But why is there no
complacent.
alternative? Why is there no alternative to Andy Burnham in Manchester?
Just let me make the point. I'm not taking anyone's votes for granted. And frankly, when Reform are outspending us 10 to 1, when you're looking at a by-election on that scale, in circumstances where the public could judge, even in the context of Andy, that the by-election was effectively unnecessary because he has another 2 years still to run, then I certainly think there would have been significant risk involved in that choice.
Now, you talked about how we've got these terribly important elections coming up for the Wales Assembly, for the Scottish Parliament, lots of local elections. One of the things that I genuinely don't understand, and I'd like you to explain how this has happened, right? I remember staying up all night, commenting on ITV about how Labour had trounced the SNP in the general election only 18 months ago. What the hell has happened since then? I mean, Labour has plummeted. An SNP that looked as though they were finished is in a commanding position again. What on earth has gone wrong?
OK, so if you look at the numbers, the SNP have had about 30 to 35% of the vote in Scotland for about 40 years. That's because those 30% or so of voters see politics primarily through the lens of identity rather than delivery. So they are immune to arguments about how hopeless the SNP government are at running our schools or our hospitals or building ferries because they see politics in a different way. But the reality is what we did in July of 2024 in Scotland was get the highest vote share of any part of Great Britain by coming in at just above the SNP with 34% plus. The SNP, by a large section of Scottish voters, are seen as being bad enough that they deserve to lose. Our responsibility as Scottish Labour is to show we're good enough that we deserve to win.
I'm incredibly impressed with your attempt to see the glass as half full, but the fundamental problem is that your popularity has sunk, and a lot of your MPs will admit to me it's because Keir Starmer is personally phenomenally unpopular. I'm going to ask you another question, which I'm sure you won't ask. Why is he so unpopular? Why is he personally so unpopular?
Because he's the leader of a government that has taken upon itself the responsibility of delivering change.
And failing, And failing?
No, not failing, but getting down to work. One of the reasons I am optimistic when I look to the next 99 days is because Anas Sarwar keeps beating the odds. You guys, respectfully, in the journalistic community, none of you believed we would win 37 seats back in July of 2024. We were universally written off last year in the Hamilton by-election. We were told it was going to be a straight contest between Reform and the SNP, and yet Labour won that seat.
Let's now shift to China and this very important trip that the Prime Minister is making. One of the things that I think for most people watching just feels like a sort of weird contradiction. On the one hand, you've got a Prime Minister who says we've got to have closer relations with China because it's such a big economy, and yet nobody who's on this mission, can take their phones there, they can't take their laptops there because they all know these will be hacked by the Chinese, their security will be... How on earth can we have friendly relations with a country that we know wants to invade our privacy in that way?
So firstly, we do need relations with China. I was first elected back in 1997. At that time, the British economy was larger than the Chinese economy. Today, China is comfortably the world's second largest economy, the world's largest exporter. About 370,000 jobs in the UK rely on that trading relationship. So it's critical that we have that relationship. But in having that relationship, we're simply replicating the approach of our allies. Why is it President Macron of France has travelled to China 3 times? Donald Trump's about to go there in April, I understand. The German Chancellor's been there 4 times. The UK has been the outlier in that there's been no prime ministerial visit to China for the last 8 years. We went from the golden age to the ice age with no intervening, sensible, stable approach to China. Now, as part of that sensible and stable approach, of course, we need to have a very clear-eyed view as to our national security and our economic security. That's what any responsible government would do. But that is not in contradiction with a continuing, really important commercial relationship.
If the commercial relationship is so important, why did you, as a recent trade minister, almost blow it up completely by going to Taiwan?
Well, I didn't. I travelled to Taiwan in a way that was entirely consistent with precedent.
But Beijing did not like it, did they?
Well, I don't speak for the Chinese government, you'll be glad to hear, and I certainly am glad to confirm. I speak for the British government. Ourselves and our predecessors have had long informal trading relationships with Taiwan, and that was reflected. We have a precedent where we don't send cabinet ministers to Taiwan. I was not in the cabinet at the time, served as trade minister. The Chinese are entitled to their point of view, but we're certainly entitled to advance our national interest.
And look, finally, look, the human rights record of China leaves much to be desired, and in particular, we're all deeply concerned about the British citizen Jimmy Lai and his imprisonment. Can we have any confidence that the Prime Minister, when he sees President Xi, will raise this in any way that, you know, gives us any hope that Jimmy Lai will be released?
So I'm sure the Prime Minister will raise this and other issues. I can't give you the guarantee that that will get the outcome we all want to see. But again, not only did I visit Taiwan last year, I visited China. I personally raised the Jimmy Lai case with the Chinese authorities. The Prime Minister raised it when he met President Xi in Brazil last year at the G20 meeting. We are utterly consistent in raising our voice and making the case for human rights to be accepted. But ultimately, the responsibility as to whether that falls on deaf ears or elicits a change sadly rests with the Chinese rather than the British government.
Well, it's good to hear we still stand up for democracy. Douglas, very good to see you. Come back anytime.
Thank you.
Rosena, I don't know if you heard Douglas Alexander said the reason the Prime Minister is unpopular is simply because you promise change and change takes a while to be delivered. Is that why Keir Starmer is unpopular?
I mean, change does take a long time to be delivered. Any former Prime Minister will tell you that it takes at least a term, if not 2, to effect the change that they'd really like to see. But I think
why is
that
Andy Burnham very popular and Keir Starmer so
I think we can speculate a lot. The reality is, in May there are going to be a set of elections that are really telling as to how people really view the Labour Party, how people really view the government, how people view Keir Starmer's leadership. It is going to be an uphill battle until then, I believe, because particularly at the time that we had the last elections, it was at the height of Partygate. Dissatisfaction was at an all-time high with the incumbent government. So we did very well. Naturally, I don't think we're going to do as well as that. But the real test, the real litmus test as to how it's going 2 years in, is going to be in May.
And you have, I think, said at some point that if you fail desperately badly in that election, then there will be questions about whether Keir Starmer is the right man to lead you.
I think naturally that will be where the conversation may go. Those are not conversations that I'm having. I support Keir Starmer. He's our leader. He is the Prime Minister. I'm standing behind him and our government, getting to May, making sure that we win as much as we can up and down the country. I mean, look, ultimately, you can laugh.
No,
you can laugh.
But we took the government actually getting to May. It's an extraordinary.
I'm speaking. Sorry.
Sorry.
We took Wandsworth, where I'm MP for Tooting, off the Conservatives after 44 years in the May elections last time. We are going to have a fight on our hands to keep that. But you know me, Robert, I love getting out there campaigning.
Love a fight.
Yeah, and I'm going to be doing my bit. And that's what the Labour Party should be focused on at the moment. That's what all of us should be focused on at the moment, not the infighting, the conjecture about who might be the next leader.
Now, I want to talk to you, Jake, about another thing I talked to Douglas Alexander about, which is China. He makes, I think, a compelling point. That, you know, it is the world's second biggest economy. We do have quite important trade links with it. We've seen recently that there are risks putting all our eggs in the American basket when they whack tariffs on us. Is it? Well, what is your view? Should a British Prime Minister go to Beijing?
There's a really important meeting happening in Beijing today between 2 leaders. one cancels elections, one cancels juries' trials, one suppresses free speech, and ruthlessly purges his opponents out of political parties.
You are
and the other
dodging my
one's Xi
question.
Jinping.
You are dodging my question.
I think the Prime Minister will have a lot in common with the leader of China. But the serious point is, I think it's a mistake because, China is not a natural ally of the United Kingdom. I appreciate it's an important.
But do you think
trading
America
partner.
that whacks tariffs on us is a natural ally?
Important trading partner. Well, we share values with America. It's really important to ally with countries who you share values with. If, I hope it doesn't happen, we end up in a global conflict, which lots of people are predicting. Some people are saying we're already in it, actually, with conflict in Europe. Do you think China are going to come out and support us? Do you think China's going to say, let me join NATO and help defend the United Kingdom?
We've got to have a dialogue with them.
But actually, let me just make this point about, the Prime Minister is very weak. He has gone to China. In advance of his trip to China, they've consented this super embassy in central London. We haven't even got confirmation from the Chinese that they will allow us to build a bigger embassy ourselves in Beijing. He has, in the same week we found out that the Chinese government has been tapping phones in number 10. They might have tapped mine when I was in there. The same year we found out last year that they'd been spying on Parliament. And we are going out with a begging bowl for China, with our Prime Minister
I
saying,
should point
it will
out,
make
though, Jake,
you
that
better
Donald
off.
Trump is on his way to see President Xi as well. So
Sure, it'll be a very different conversation. Trump is not going with his hand out.
Look, there's tons more I need to talk to both of you about, and all of you at home, don't go away, because actually we have got Pippa on the ground in Beijing. She's been spending time with the Prime Minister, and she'll tell us how it's all going.
OK, welcome to Twitter break number 1 this evening. We're talking who's in and who's out. So you've got to choose who's in and who's out in this particular game. Pick your next defection, Jake. I mean, you've already said no to Liz Truss, so...
Well, yeah, both me and Nigel Farage.
You can rule her out.
I think it will be Jacob Rees-Mogg.
Jacob Rees-Mogg, you think that?
Yeah, and the reason I think it is there's a potential by-election in his old constituency. He won't win as a Conservative. He won't win as an independent. There's one party he can win for, and he might just come over.
I thought you might say Boris Johnson, that you fancied at least. For like, as a dream defection, that you'd fancy Boris Johnson as a defectee rather than...
I've answered.
All right. OK. Jacob Rees-Mogg next. Rosena, this one's for you. Dream Labour cabinet member. You can have Angela Rayner, Andy Burnham or Zach Polanski.
Oh, it's got to be Angela Rayner.
Yeah?
Yeah.
Do you think she's ready for a comeback?
She was so effective in cabinet. If we just look at like the leasehold reforms, for example, that would just have just been published, she deserves a prominent place back in cabinet. Andy Burnham, we just talked about that ad infinitum. He's nowhere near it, and no thanks to Zach Polanski, particularly after what he said about carers.
Oh, OK. Right. Yeah, what did he say about carers?
He said something horrible on...
Oh, about wiping their backsides.
Yeah, nobody wants to be wiping, but it was awful.
Yeah, he has apologised for that, but you haven't forgiven him.
He's not in
right,
my cabinet.
Seat of power. Who should be our leader? Who would you most like to be our leader out of this
Why are there
lot?
no women on there?
Good question.
Yeah.
Hang on, there aren't many female leaders. Who can you think of around the world? These are all
Wonder
leaders
why.
of
Maloney.
countries.
There's Maloney. You could have put Maloney on.
You're definitely going to choose Giorgia Maloney, aren't you? As your
Jake
dream
would.
leader.
Jake might. Who do you want? Trump, Jake? You can have Macron, you can have Mark Carney, Zelensky.
No,
or Xi.
I'm going to go for the wild card and say George Maloney, because I agree with you.
All right, we've got to go.
There should be more women on there. There's not even one.
Rosena makes a good point.
Welcome back. I'm delighted that Pippa's out in China for us. Pippa, lovely to see you. You've just spent hours on a plane with the Prime Minister, who, frankly, has had some of the worst days since he became Prime Minister. What's his mood?
Well, Robert, despite the fact that it is freezing cold here, the Prime Minister is intent on having a thawing of relations with the Chinese. And I have to say, he's in a pretty upbeat mood. There's nowhere that Keir Starmer likes being better than on the international trail. And China is, of course, one of the biggest relationships of the lot. It's the world's second biggest economy. It's our third biggest trading partner. The Prime Minister's brought a delegation with him of business leaders and cultural leaders, and he's desperate to do business. He thinks that improved economic ties with China after years of uncertainty and indeed really quite friction between Britain and China, he hopes that will help us make lots of deals and be good for the British economy, which obviously, as you know, is desperate for growth.
I just got to ask you one very quick question. What were you and ITV's Carl Dinnan doing interviewing the Prime Minister on the loo? What was all that about?
Well, we have these things called huddles in planes where the Prime Minister will come back and talk to the assorted journalists. There's about 25 of us, so there was quite a lot of us to cram in. And as you know, even a big jet, there isn't much room for moving around. So people were sitting on the floor, they were standing behind him, all trying to get close to hear what he had to say about the trip coming up and his meeting with President Xi on Thursday. And there wasn't much space for anyone, so Carl and I ended up backing up into the plane loo.
OK, anyway, hope the acoustics were good. Are we going to get any business deals out of this?
Well, that's certainly the hope, and he's brought a delegation of 50 business and cultural leaders who will all be keen to strike deals when they're out here, to build relationships when they're here. And one of the themes that we're really picking up from those business leaders, but also Peter Carl, the business secretary, is here, and Keir Starmer himself, is that there's so much unpredictability and uncertainty around the UK's relationship with the States, which is obviously a much more sort of natural trading partner for us. And as a result of that, we've been threatened with tariffs. We saw what happened last week when Mark Carney, the Prime Minister of Canada, came over here, tried to do a deal with the Chinese, and Trump responded by threatening 100% tariffs. Downing Street are very aware of that, very cautious about that. But nevertheless, it is such a big trading partner. They're going to be really keen to make sure that those economic ties continue. But it's a difficult path for the Prime Minister to tread for all the reasons around national security that you've already mentioned on the show. And there's a lot of criticism back home about we handle all of that. But while the world is sort of realigning and Trump is not seen as being a reliable partner, the Chinese are keen to make the most of the opportunity.
And back home again, when you and your colleagues asked the Prime Minister about Andy Burnham, did you get any sense he got any regrets about the way that he rebuffed him?
I think he would have liked it to have played out in a slightly less dramatic way. I mean, we hear a lot from this government, as you know, that they don't want the psychodrama surrounding it that surrounded the previous Tory administration with leaders changing every 2 minutes. But ultimately, I think they feel that they did what they had to do in blocking Andy Burnham. And while there was a lot of anger on the back benches and among the unions about stopping him run in that by-election and come back to Parliament, they basically thought, why on earth would you smooth the path for someone whose sole aim, as they view it, for coming back to Westminster is to challenge the leadership and to try and oust Keir Starmer? Why would they make that easy for them? So they think that the short-term pain is worth it for the long-term gain. But what I pick up, and I'm sure you do as well, Robert, is that MPs are no happier with Keir Starmer than they were before all of this happened. In fact, probably unhappier, and it's got them all talking about the leadership again, which Downing Street really doesn't want to happen.
And on the leadership, I mean, you'll be picking up what I'm picking up, which is that Angela Rayner is about to make, a bit more of a return to visible politics. My strong sense is that as and when the leadership is up for grabs, she will be a candidate. What's your view?
I 100% agree. As you rightly say, she's been focusing on policy issues so far. sticking her head above the parapet on math issues that she was in charge of when she was in government, like the workers' rights legislation, like leaseholders' legislation, to try and make sure they go through and aren't watered down. She has this tax issue hanging over her, which she's relying on HMRC to resolve. But once it has, I think we'll hear a lot more from her politically, not just behind the scenes, the sort of stuff she's been doing about not going away at fundraising dinners and constituency party events around the country, but take a much more public profile. And while her people suggest, or allies of Angela Rayner suggest, that she would never try and push Keir Starmer out, should an opportunity arise, because of course others may decide to take that route, then she would be first in line. And friends of hers also tell me that they wouldn't see her as being somebody that would be anybody else's deputy. They say she took the scars for Jeremy Corbyn, she took the scars for Keir Starmer. If she's going to take the scars for anybody, it'll be herself this time.
Thanks so much, Pippa. Incredibly insightful as always. And we'll see you back here in the studio next week. Safe travels. Rosena, we haven't got very much time, but very quickly, if we're right that Angela Rayner will be back quite soon, would you like to see her as a candidate to be leader as and when there's a vacancy?
If Keir Starmer stepped down or was no longer going to be the Prime Minister for whatever reason, yes, I would love to see her make a return and throw her hat in the ring.
Yeah, interesting. Going to come back to both of you in just a minute or two, but we are now going to move on to a rather different subject with Paul.
Yeah, we're going to talk about assisted dying for a moment because there's been so much focus on the front bench, as you were saying, Robert, talking about Angela Rayner's return. What about what's going on the back benches and this assisted dying bill that's sort of flying under the radar right now? There are concerns tonight that this bill is not now going to pass the Lords. In fact, this evening, the sponsor in the House of Lords, Lord Falconer, has said that there is no hope, in his words, of it passing unless something radically changes. This is why 1,200 amendments almost have been tabled so far to this bill. That is the highest number in 20 years for any bill. Look how it compares to the other bills that have been so far debated this Parliament too, way above anything else that we're seeing at the moment. This is an extraordinary number of amendments, which leads to this accusation that maybe Lords are trying to run down the clock. Look at how it compares to the size of the bill as well. It's not a particularly chunky bill, but 23 amendments per page of the assisted dying bill have been tabled. Look, 2 amendments per page of the crime and policing bill, for example. So, again, this leads to that accusation that this is being over-amended in an attempt to talk down the clock. So far, the Lords are just way off track with this. They're getting through about 2 groups of amendments, 1 group of amendments, 3 groups of amendments per day that they're sitting. 5 was the best that they managed. In total, they've done about 20 groupings of these amendments. They've got another 69 groups to go. They're just not going to do it under these circumstances. So that is why this evening they're talking about taking a pretty extraordinary constitutional route here and using the Parliament Act. It's only been used about 7 times before. This would allow them to bring an identical bill in the next session of Parliament and force it through the Lords. Under the Parliament Act, the Lords can only block a bill once. This would be a controversial step. They say it is a necessary one. And for all the data this week, I want to thank our friends, including Ruth Fox at the Hansard Society. They are our Geek of the Week. Geek of the Week. Right, I want to ask you guys about this because, Rosena, you voted in Parliament. I know, Jake, you weren't in Parliament for the vote in the Commons on this recently. Rosena, you voted against the assisted dying bill. But I wonder how you feel about the Lords, you know, being in an elected chamber and potentially blocking it now. How does that sit with you?
But firstly, as a doctor, as someone who has had the very first-hand experience of somebody dying in a very painful, difficult way, I understand how difficult this issue is. I understand arguments on both sides, and I respect everyone's opinions on this. The reason I didn't feel that I could vote for it in its current form was because I didn't feel that the safeguards were robust enough. I really didn't. And for me, that was so important, and it was such a sense of responsibility taking that vote. I don't know what's going on in the Lords. I don't sit there. I don't know if this is an attempt to block something or whether they genuinely have some of the concerns that many of us had in the Commons and are robustly debating it. I don't feel that it was a bill best debated in that way. I think if it was brought properly to Parliament and a lot more focus was.
Are you happy though for the Lords to overrule it?
Well, I don't want anyone to look. It
was passed by MPs.
I always want due process to happen, right? But we have the Lords there for a reason.
Okay.
You have the Lords there to scrutinise what goes on, you know, in the Commons.
Jake, could this be dangerous, do you think, for the Lords? There will be outcry from some in the public
So,
if
look,
they block it.
I'm sure there will be. You know, this is a very sensitive issue, but I think the reason is, sure, not intentionally, but to compare government bills with private members' bills is a bit comparing sort of apples and oranges.
Yeah.
I would think one of the reasons that there's been so many amendments, again, I haven't tracked out, I'm not in the Lords, is because it hasn't been a government-sponsored bill. Government-sponsored bills are written by civil servants, parliamentary council will go through them, they will look at all these issues, particularly around safeguardings and guardrails that should be... That doesn't happen with private members' bills.
They have had government support to draft the bill.
It's not a criticism of the bill itself, but I think the Lords do think that those guardrails are not in place. Look, personally, I mean, I did get one opportunity to vote. Personally, I don't support assisted dying. That's driven by the fact that I've nursed two very close relatives of mine through the last stages of life in cancer. I really think the state should be concentrating on investing more in palliative care, supporting people at the end of their life so they don't feel that an assisted suicide is the only way out for them, the only way for them to escape pain.
Do you think that 1,200 amendments, half of them tabled by just 7 peers, though, does look as though parliamentary process is being abused in some way to try and frustrate the bill?
Well, I think what you're saying is that some people feel very strongly about this. I feel quite strongly about it. If I was in the Lords or the Commons, I won't be in the Lords, but if I was in the Commons, I would be resisting this.
Okay, all right. Thank you both.
Thank you.
Right, Robert.
Yeah, thanks all of you. Now, a little earlier, I spoke with the chair of the Migration Advisory Committee, Brian Bell. Now, as I'm sure pretty much all of you know, voters' concern about immigration, and that's the red line here, is rising and is at high levels, even though legal migration is falling very sharply. It's small boats and asylum seekers, this blue line that seems to... I mean, it's rising, as you can see. So many of you are concerned by. So I began my conversation with Professor Brian Bell by pointing out to him that the Home Secretary, Shabana Mahmood, had revealed only a couple of days ago that the so-called one-in, one-out deal with France to send unlawful migrants back to France is, in fact, seeing more asylum seekers being sent by France here than we send there. So I wanted to know what he made of all of that.
It has to match at some point because that's the deal that we've got with France. So I'm not surprised that at any point in time there'll be differences in numbers. The other thing to note, as the Home Secretary made clear the other day, is it is a pilot scheme. So the numbers are deliberately small to make sure, almost like a proof of concept. What we don't know yet is what the next bit would be. So it's absolutely fine if it's a pilot scheme. It seems to be having some effect. The question is, will it be 10,000? Will it be 50,000. So that's still to be determined once we've passed that stage. Will it have much of a deterrent effect? I think it fundamentally does depend on the size of the agreement. If it stays at anything like these kind of levels, it can't have much of a deterrent effect because the probability of being sent back remains quite small.
So, look, now let's get back to the really big numbers, which are the authorised, the legal migration. And you know, this is a really extraordinary chart, isn't it? Because, you know, if you just look here, the surge from, you know, in sort of end of 2020 into 2021 to this extraordinary peak. This is often referred to as the Boris wave. What was happening there? Why were those numbers surging to that extent? And to what extent was that simply the fault, if you think it's a bad thing, of Boris Johnson's government?
Yeah, so 3 big drivers, all of actually, interestingly, about the same size. One was Ukraine and Hong Kong. So government decided in 2021-22 to open up visa routes for people suffering from the war in Ukraine and from the Chinese attacks on democracy. Workers, particularly in health and care.
So that's pink.
So both pinks there, the workers themselves and the dependents they're allowed to bring, particularly in the care sector. We'd come out of the pandemic, the care sector was on its knees. The government, in my view, quite rightly decided that something needed to be done in terms of helping.
And at the time, that was popular.
That was popular, yeah. And still is to an extent. If you ask the voters, do you think we need more care workers, they'll say yes. And then the third, which is not on this chart, is students. So universities very significantly increased their numbers of international students because the funding model doesn't really work. They lose money on teaching domestic students. The only way they can break even is to bring in international students.
And then, you know, we've still got a social care system and indeed a health service that is struggling. We've seen a tremendous fall-off in health and care and health and care workers. Should we actually be worried about that?
Oh, I think we should be. I mean, you know, the reason that this has come down so strongly is because the previous government decided to ban care workers from bringing their dependents with them. And so that became a less attractive option for the care worker themselves, of course, as well. So we've seen a big decline. I think at the moment, the care sector is doing all right because it got so many workers through in the 2 or 3 years after the pandemic. So vacancy rates are still not back to the sort of levels they were. Move forward 2 or 3 years, you're going to be back to the same problem unless we can deal with the fundamental problem in social care, which is we don't pay workers enough. Too many of them earn the minimum wage. Why would you work in social care on the minimum wage when
and
all
just to be clear, if we did pay more, could we train up as many as we need in the next 2 or 3 years?
I don't see why not. I mean, first of all...
So it is about what they're paid.
Care work, by and large, I think that's the key determinant. Care work is not a job that you require extensive experience for. It's a lot of on-the-job training can be done. We've got 1 million 18 to 24-year-olds who are not in employment, education and training. It shouldn't be beyond us to work out how to match those.
Don't go away, because there's much more on what is the right approach to deal with immigration from Brian Bell, and lots more from Rosena and Jake too. See you in a minute.
All right, in this Twitter break, we are going to take the mick again out of Emmanuel Macron, as Keir Starmer did. But we're going to try and match up the politician with the iconic item of clothing. So let's start with the tartan Dr. Martens. Go on, Rosena.
Angela Rayner.
Yeah, it's got to be, isn't it? Do you want to try the Star Wars socks, Jake? Because that's a bit tricky, actually.
Trudeau?
Yeah, good one. This is easy, leopard print heels.
Theresa May.
Yeah, she must be sick of being associated with leopard print heels by now. Adidas Sambas.
Rishi.
Yeah. Robert, do you want to try knitted... Well,
I think we know. There's only one left.
All right, can you tell me where this picture was taken?
On a cold day.
On a cold day, what often happens at a cold time of year in America that's a really big event?
Groundhog Day. No?
Only happens once every 4 years.
Oh. Was it really?
It was the inauguration.
Yeah, I'm going to say, was it the inauguration? Right, OK.
Very well done, all. Thank you.
Thank you.
So big it was Groundhog Day.
We'll see you in a few minutes' time.
Welcome back now. In the second part of my interview with the Migration Advisory Committee Chair, Brian Bell, I asked him what he made of reports that very high numbers of young people are leaving the country.
Well, there's a bit of a puzzle, I think it's fair to say, in the data, which is that the Office of National Statistics, who produced this data, they suggest that, on average, every year, about 100,000 more Brits leave than come back. The problem with that is that you don't need to tell anyone when you leave, and you don't need to tell anyone when you come back. You're not subject to immigration control. Right. So we don't really know whether 100,000 is the right number.
So we're not really surveying this in an accurate way?
Not at all. I mean, and the ONS accept this, that it's a real mystery. So we don't know who leaves. So we definitely don't know that it's the young,
So we don't know if there's a brain drain, is what I'm saying?
Absolutely, we don't know that.
OK, that's very interesting. But do you believe that there is a realistic chance that, you know, net migration will fall to 0 or less?
It's possible. I mean, I think my view is that the green line, the dotted green line looks quite sensible.
Yeah.
The dotted orange line, the emigration, relies on a quite strong assumption that a lot of people who came a few years ago won't be able to stay in the long run. They won't be able to get onto another visa that allows them to stay. Usually what we've seen in the past is that people are who want to stay are quite adept at finding a new visa to get onto. So there I'd have a bit less confidence. The number may go below 0. I have to say, it's going to be controversial, I don't really care whether it goes below 0 because it's just a number. 0 is not a special number, it's just another number. So it will dip down. Whether it gets below 0, I'm not sure. What I am sure of is that if nothing else changes, we'll bounce back up again. Not to the sort of levels we saw at the past, but it wouldn't surprise me if we get back to the sort of levels we saw in 2016 to 2020.
Another aspect of this debate, one of the most contentious aspects, which is those people who oppose migration, say that migrants are a net drain on the state. But these are your figures.
Yep.
And they tell a very different story, don't they? So talk me through these.
So this shows you, in the first year that the person comes to the UK, what their fiscal contribution is. In other words, how much taxes do they pay, and how much do we think they're going to use public services. And what you see is that the standard UK adult, we've got there for comparison, is positive, about £3,400. That might make us think we're in a fiscally great position because they're even positive. But remember, there's lots of children who are very costly. So UK
and presumably older people.
And older people as well. So UK workers are actually really positive because they're in their prime age. What we see here, though, is that where you look at the skilled workers outside of health and care, so the tech sector, finance, all those kind of, they're phenomenally fiscally positive, 40,300.
And can I just ask a final question? Because I was very interested talking to very senior members of the Cabinet. The government is about, or is in the process of shifting to try and get not just more skilled workers, but trying to get many more super skilled workers. Is that a rational policy?
It's completely rational. So this is often described as global talent. We want the most talented people. That's a great idea. And they will be even more fiscally positive than this. So there's a real benefit to having them. But we shouldn't get carried away. There aren't queues of Nobel Prize winners waiting to come into the UK, and it's just...
Even with Trump in the White House,
Even with Trump in the White House. Just waiting for a generous visa system.
Right.
And similarly, if you're a tech entrepreneur, are you going to choose London or are you going to choose Silicon Valley? I think the balance is still the other way around. So it's a great idea, and the more we can get, the better. But it won't fundamentally change the big picture of the UK.
So work in progress is what you're saying. Brian, lovely to see you. That was all beautifully explained. Come back again soon.
Thank you.
Jake, reform's popularity very much correlated with rising concern about immigration. If the forecasts are correct that immigration is trending down to zero, does that spell a collapse in support for reform?
No, I don't think it does. I think you really rightly in that interview filleted out illegal and legal migration. So it is correct that some of the actions taken by the previous government and actually by this government are going to see immigration fall. I think that will be popular with the British public. I wouldn't move away from that. But what people are really concerned about is this spectacle of 40,000 people plus a year, using last year's figures, coming to the UK, the government's inability seemingly to control our national borders, a government that came in promising that it was going to smash the gangs, which I think, as far as I can tell, they've made no progress on that. And I think that's what's driving people's concerns. Because frankly, the first job of any government is to keep their people safe. We don't know who's coming into this country. Actually, we only count the ones coming across the channel in dinghies. We no longer count them coming in lorries and coaches and things like that. That's what people are really concerned about. And that's why people are supporting reform, because they want them to get a grip on that, not just because they want to stem that flow, but they also want a government who can control our borders.
Do you think it is embarrassing, I mean, given that the government has made so much of this one-in, one-out deal with France, that actually it's not huge numbers, but we're actually taking in more migrants from France than we're sending back?
The absolute numbers are falling, and actually Jake was a minister
I'm just
in
talking about the
government
one-in, one-out policy,
when it was at its highest.
Numbers going up.
But you were a minister in government when it was at an all-time high in 2022. So I think your government has got a lot to blame for that.
We're talking about asylum seekers here.
In all honesty, nobody wants to see anyone coming over in small boats.
Yeah, it's so dangerous.
I've been to Calais. I've met families who feel as though they've got no choice but to seek refuge by doing that. They are exploited by criminal gangs. There are ways in which this could be made much safer. There are ways in which the process could be better. Asylum cases could be processed much faster. They could be processed overseas. There are lots of ways in which this can improve. But I think it's really important, and I really want to say this very strongly, that as politicians, we have to be so mindful of the rhetoric around this, because hate crime has gone up 6% since last year. We're seeing what goes on over in America with people being killed you know, in our streets, we have a lot of very damaging rhetoric here that impacts the lives of people like myself and my family. I'm you know, the product of a Polish-Pakistani marriage. My parents contributed to this country. I am now raised here. Like, that doesn't happen in many places in the world. We should be really proud of the fact that that happens here in the UK and celebrate the people that come and support us and work here. And just on the point
Jake,
about
you
the
must have been
social
horrified by the killings by American federal officers
They were
of those two individuals who were just trying to observe what was going on.
Do you know why it just makes me so thankful that we live in a country where guns aren't carried by the police, normally, and the public don't carry guns. I think where you have situations like that that get out of control when everyone's walking around with a gun, people lose their lives. It's absolutely appalling.
Can I just ask? Can I just quickly ask
Thank goodness
Paul,
we don't live in that sort of state.
we're almost out. I just want to ask Paul one question. I mean, somebody who spends a lot of time looking at the social care and health sector. How damaging are they finding this emigration or the difficulty of getting care workers from abroad?
Yeah, I'm sure Rosena's got strong feelings on this as well. The care sector say to me that it is totally counterproductive to increase tighter visa controls. I mean, the care visa now has been scrapped pretty much altogether. And this is a sector that already has massive worker shortages, Rosena.
Well, it does. I mean, it hugely does. And I know that working in the NHS, I'm so proud of my colleagues that come from all parts of the world that serve us and our families. But if we want to make the care sector more appealing for people from the UK to work in, we have to be able to create jobs and opportunities for growth. They have to be able to
and many would say they also have to be paid better. Annoyingly, we're out of time. I'm really, really, really sorry. Now, that is it. You may have noticed we hardly mentioned Donald Trump at all tonight. He won't like that at all, so goodness only knows what he'll do next week, before next week's episode. See you then.